Cherry is a new film that was coming straight to Apple TV+. It's based off of the book written by Nico Walker that is autobiographical slash heavily fictionalized in some areas. It stars Tom Holland as the man named Cherry. It is directed by the Russo Brothers, so they are reuniting to tell this story about a man who has lived a lot of different places in his life, either just a dumbstruck in love college kid, to a stoner, to guy in the military, to guy with PTSD, to bank robber. So there's a lot of ground to cover, and I was actually really excited for this movie because based on the trailer, it looked like the Russo brothers were going to do something really different with their directing style. Obviously, you know the kind of movies that they have made before. It's the Avengers Endgame and all those movies. And they're obviously really great comic book directors. They also directed a comedy movie called You, Me, and Dupree, which I assume has like no directorial flair at all because it's just an Owen Wilson comedy. So based off of the trailer, it looked like a pretty good chance for them to shine, to show off what more they could do behind the camera, what interesting creative decisions they could make, which had me really excited. Also, it could have benefited the movie because it is very long. There's a 2-hour and 20-minute kind of runtime, and there's a lot of ground to cover in the story, so that runtime already seems perfect enough to cover a lot of stuff that they have to in this man's life. And also, these creative decisions they make are probably going to help have people at least be entertained just by the look of the movie or certain things they're doing editing. Like, people will be entertained by the different things we're doing. And also, we got Tom Holland. What can go wrong, right? And I definitely can commend them on every single creative choice they made to try to make this a little more digestible, because there's a lot of interesting camera work. There's a lot of interesting lighting choices that they make, like certain ways they play with like shadows at one point, or just like spotlighting a single person. Honestly, at the end of the day, I never found myself bored with this movie. It is always interesting to look at in one way or the other. They also have Tom Holland narrating, so there's certain things that, you know, metaphorically speaking, of course, they will hold hands with you as they guide you through the plot. Like, okay, this happened and then this happened. Don't feel like you're being left behind narratively because we keep jumping ahead. Like, I'm gonna guide you here because I am the narrator. They also separate this into like chapters. They have like a prologue at the beginning, and then it's like chapter 1, 2, 3. Kind of like Zack Snyder's Justice League, funny enough. Another movie that's pretty long. Not as long as Justice League, but has chapters. And in this movie, it's just to show off like this is the different parts of his life, but it also helps the average viewer if you're like, I need a break, I can't sit in one setting and watch this. If a chapter comes up, you can just pause it and come back to it later. That's beneficial, sure. However, for all of the things I can commend them for that are interesting, that they try to do to make this movie a little more digestible to the average audience member, to have it go by quicker than what it seems like, there's also ways that these decisions work against the movie too. Like, there's a lot of stylistic choices in this that I found really interesting, but then there's a lot that I was like, okay, I think with different editing this could be pulled off, but right now it just seems like you're doing it just to have style, and I'm not necessarily opposed to this, but there's a way you kind of edit it into the movie that I don't think you did very well. And then there's other things they did where I was like, that didn't need to be there at all, really. Like, there's certain decisions they make where I'm like, I have no idea what you're really going for if you're trying to push like some kind of theme, but or something, but I don't really understand. Like, at one point when Tom Holland is in like basic training, the aspect ratio changes to like the box. Like Zack Snyder's Justice League 4:3, but not filmed with IMAX, so it's like bars here and then bars on the top too. It's still letterboxed. So I was watching it and I was like, I don't know why they changed aspect ratios for this one segment of the movie. I don't really understand the choice. There's like names of banks that are changed to like shitty bank or like none credit, something like that, credit none. And it's, I don't really understand what they were going for with that. Obviously they're like trying to poke fun at banks, but the way they kind of work it into the movie, it's kind of so subtle, like they never really highlight a lot of the stuff they're doing, so it's just like, it's stuff that you see in the background, and I'm like, I don't know, like, are you trying to make a message? Like, what's the statement here? I don't understand. Even narration, like, I'm not necessarily opposed to narration all the time in movies, but if you're gonna have it, it should, like, strengthen the story as opposed to kind of work against it, and I feel like here it does. Like, yes, Tom Holland does narrate certain things that the movie doesn't have to necessarily dwell on or spend more time than it needs to developing, but after a while, it just kind of feels like, yeah, you're not getting left behind in the story, but you're not really getting too invested in it either. Like, you're just kind of gliding through the events and not really being necessarily impacted by a whole lot of them, because it seems like they're just going along and going along. I think there is an argument to be made that this could have been a limited series as opposed to a 2 hour 20-minute movie, because that would actually give you could take these chapters that they have, the part ones, the part twos, and make those singular episodes, stretch them out so you can live in this world and live with this man's life. I think that actually would have worked a lot better. Like if you also you might maybe keep it a little stylized, but if you also just kind of played it straight too, like maybe you don't need a whole lot of Tom Holland narration. Yeah, I honestly think that would have worked a lot better, but for some reason they made the decision to go movie, which is definitely a task to do, as obviously they made a lot of decisions to try to make it work for a movie, and unfortunately not every choice they made is working though. Like, unfortunately, there's just a lot of like motivation and like character decisions that I just didn't really find like there was a lot of support for that. Like at one point Tom Holland decides to join the military, and it's just like one of those things where something tragic happens in his life, and then the next second that's like the only reason why he's like now abruptly walking up to this like military office to register. It's like, is there anything else? Because there is someone in his life who is constantly saying like, don't do it, don't join the military. And although Tom Holland says, I never really understood the specifics of what he was saying, I feel like there's the basic statement of don't join, and there's not really enough drive other than he just kind of got his heart broken to want to join the military, if you know what I mean. Like, well, it's better than being sad, but do you have like a specific interest or a specific passion for it? They don't really elaborate on that, so the transition felt really rushed. I will say though, like as far as like tone goes, there are pretty intense scenes in this movie. I don't just mean like when Tom Holland is robbing banks later. Obviously those are filmed really well and directed really well. There's like a battle scene that happens when he's sent overseas, and it's really intense and it's really well done. But even like the basic training stuff, I think everyone kind of gets a sense that like, yeah, a lot of this does happen. Like obviously there's a lot of yelling and a lot of like demoralizing, but they actually do a really great job of editing it up in this movie, and you're kind of like, ooh, it's like one after the other of stuff where you're like, I don't ever want to be in this position, ever. So despite certain things working against this movie, there are still things that do work, and I am thoroughly kind of entertained by. But even after his long stint with the military, you get to know some of the people there, and he faces tragedy over there too. When he comes back though, the way they edit it, it's kind of like as soon as he walks into the door of his house, it cuts, and now it's like a montage of him just freaking out and having PTSD, and he can't really adjust, and he's freaking out a lot. And it's like, if this were like a limited series, you could have a whole episode of him just like slowly kind of building like tensions boiling inside him, like he can't cope, he can't deal with this new environment. Instead, in this movie, it's just like one after the other abrupt, angry moments that you get, like you understand on a basic level why it's happening, but you aren't feeling it and you're not really living it. Through this whole movie though, Tom Holland is terrific. He is doing a fantastic job. It's probably his best performance to date so far, if I'm gonna be honest. Like, it's not his best movie, but as far as like his performance goes, he puts a lot into it. There are a lot of different stages in this man's life, and I think he captures all of it really well. There's not one moment where I was like, he's unconvincing here, he's not really pulling this off. Like, no, like even when he's like a drug addict, like you can see like, I believe him completely that he is like just taken drugs. Obviously I don't think he did for filming this movie, but I would believe it, because he is perfectly kind of authentic in this role. He's doing a fantastic job. You feel happy with him, you feel the love he has for his girlfriend, played by Ciara Bravo, but you also feel sadness for him too. You understand how tragic his life kind of is at this point, how the decisions he's made have kind of led him down this dark path. Also really great in this movie that no one's really talking about a whole lot, it seems, like Ciara Bravo, straight from Big Time Rush, which is kind of weird. Like, I watched that as a kid, and I recognized her as I was watching this. I was like, oh my god, it's her, and she still looks like a young girl, which is really weird. But it's also like, it's weird for the movie's context too, because a lot of bad stuff is happening and you're just thinking about like how young she looks the whole time too. It's like, oh no, like that adds like an extra layer of tragedy. But other than that too, she has like some really like terrific like freak out moments where like acting wise you're like, oh god, like you're taken aback because she's killing it. She's really upset and she's really angry, and she's like just laying it all out, and you're like, that's great, but oh god, you know, if you were in the same room as that performance, you'd probably like avoid eye contact, not look, like, you know, stuff like that. Like, she really killed it. Their chemistry works really well. I totally bought their relationship. I thought they were good in the movie. However, when it came to like near the end of the movie, there was a certain wave of like unsatisfaction I had, because it wraps up. It does have an ending, at least that. But there's just certain elements where I was like, I wonder like what's going on here. I wonder what happened after this specific thing. I'm trying my best not to spoil anything, but they do introduce like certain people at one point when tragedy kind of strikes and certain people come in. And I was thinking, like, I wonder what they're doing right now. If this were a limited series, these characters probably would play a bit more of a role. If this was a limited series, there might be a bit more of an epilogue to this. It definitely feels like that they had their idea for an ending, and they were going to stick to it, even if certain things kind of were left hanging. Overall, there's definitely creative decisions made behind the camera. There's definitely ways they wrote this movie where I was like, okay, I get what they're trying to do. It's fairly engaging here. In these parts, Henry Jackman does a really great score with this movie. He does some really tremendous work, and Tom Holland and Ciara Bravo are really carrying this movie. There's no weak link performance in this movie too, which helps. There's a lot of great actors in the supporting roles too, but unfortunately I feel like a lot of the creative decisions that the Russo brothers thought would help ultimately kind of held this movie back too, and I feel like different decisions could have been made to make this story, this adaptation of the book, really fantastic. I'm gonna give Cherry a C+. I think that this man's life, or the autobiographical / fictionalized version of his life, there's a lot that you can cover here. There's a lot of intrigue and promise here, and this movie covers a lot of it fairly well, but then, you know, it's not as great as it could be. There's certain things they kind of skimp details on. I know there's been specific changes made from his life, or from the book, that they did for the movie, and that could have been more interesting to see too if they had played it a little differently. But this is the movie we got, and I thought it was okay. I kind of heard, or maybe I was just misinterpreting what I heard, that it was probably going to end up being a disaster, but I didn't think it was a disaster. I think there's a lot of good ideas pushing it, but unfortunately it works against it too. And I do have to fault it for that. But if you've seen Cherry, leave in the comments below what you thought of it. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.